Hi all, I just wanted to jump on and say welcome. We're letting participants in now. So it will take a few more minutes while they all get through that portal, and then we'll be able to do an official welcome. All right, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm Sarah Neville Morgan, and I'm a Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction for the Opportunities for All branch at the California Department of Education, or CDE. OFAB consists of 5 divisions within CDE, and our hashtag is equity in action. Why? That's because we have early learning, where we start early, expanded learning, where we ensure that we can address before, after, and in the summer, multilingual support, where we can address all of our learners who speak multiple languages, as well as migrant and migratory. We have nutrition services, where we can ensure that all of our students and young children have access to nutritious meals, and we can address food insecurity. And we also have special education, where we can support the inclusion of all of our children and students with disabilities. I want to start by thanking all of you for your hard work to support children and families during these trying times. And I hope that you share my excitement of this moment with the unprecedented, yet yes, we say historic investments in education that are giving us the opportunity to build back a better system. We will be touching on a lot of high-level content today, but we'll also be reaching out in groups in the future to understand specific needs so that CDE can provide support to meet those needs. We've also launched a new P-3 or preschool to 3rd grade, or even pre, if you think of early childhood website, and we'll be moving forward with deeper dives through a webinar series and newsletter. So there are many more opportunities for us to learn and work together in the future. So presenting with me today, I have some valued members of our OFAB team, as well as a national expert. So first we have Tina Transer, who's an education administrator in the Opportunities for All branch. We have Stephen Profiter, who is the director of the Early Learning and Care Division. We have Heather Calamise, who's the director of our Special Education Division. And also Selena Torres, who is our interim director for the Multilingual Support Division. And we're so excited to be joined today by Kristie Kauerz, who is the director of the National P-3 Center at the University of Colorado at Denver. We are beyond lucky to have her partnership as we launch our P-3 alignment here in California, as she's a preeminent expert in all things in the P-3 alignment space, a true systems expert who has really pioneered this work across this country. So welcome, Kristie, in working with California at the state level. She's done a little bit at some of the locals, but this is the first time that we've been able to engage this here at CDE and really take it up across the state. Now I'm going to turn over our meeting to Tina Transer.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome participants. We are so excited to have you all joining us today as we launch our P3 webinar series in a time of unprecedented investment in education, from childcare through higher education. So my name is Dr. Tina Transer, and I am an education administrator for our Opportunities for All branch here at California Department of Education. The purpose of today's webinar, which is the first in a series, is to address some immediate questions related to P3 and the pending funding but we also want to set the stage for future P3 collaboration and co-creation for community engagements, including our California tribal community. I am going to briefly run through our agenda and our specific objectives for this time and our time together this afternoon, with the excitement of understanding that we'll have webinars in the future as well. So today, we are going to start with an overview of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our California children. Then we are going to transition to thinking about ways to address those impacts through our preschool through third grade alignment strategies. With the help of our partner and the National P-3 Center, before we spend some time talking about the specifics of how districts can use federal and state funds heading their way, because they're coming, to support that work, we want and to set districts and schools up for long-term P3 success. So to support that final conversation, I'd like to invite you all to think through the presentation. And as we are thinking through the presentation, I want you to think about wows and wonders that you might like to share at the end. So we will be asking you for your thoughts in the chat towards the end of the meeting. Thank you. So our specific objective today, is for us to first share some information that we have at the state level about the impact of the COVID pandemic on our learning opportunities for our preschool and elementary children, with a focus on our multilingual learners and our children with disabilities who we now know have significantly been impacted. Next, we're going to think about ways to address those impacts of preschool through third grade alignment strategies. We're hoping to ensure that everyone is familiar with the CDE P3 Alignment Initiative and how we view this new initiative as a continuum of our future work and a window into how we hope our work will change and shift, just as we support local implementation, but in the ways we work together at CDE as well. Then we'll provide an overview of P3 strategies that can support teachers and schools, which will better support our children's learning in the wake of the pandemic and beyond. We'll spend some time providing some examples and engaging in Q&A with you about how districts and schools can use the federal and state COVID recovery funds that's headed their way to support implementation of P3 strategies. So this is an exciting time for us. So I'm going to start us off by talking a little bit about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on families in California. And then I will turn it over to our division directors, who will talk about how the pandemic has impacted the services of children and families that they oversee. So let's begin by looking at the information. I'm going to provide some information on what we know about the pandemic and the impact of COVID-19 on our families. Specifically, a poll that surveyed 600 California parents of children ages 0 to 5 about the impact of COVID-19 crisis revealed significant impacts on parents and young children's well-being during the pandemic. California's parents of infants, toddlers, and preschools are experiencing intense financial insecurity during this time. Unemployment and temporary loss of work are affecting 19% of parents of young children in California. These are some of the impacts. Further, even among employed parents, more than a third, that's 37%, have had their hours or pay reduced or taken time off to care for their children or their child as a result of the crisis. And 7 in 10, that would be 71%, say that they worry about losing their jobs or having their hours reduced in the future. We know this economic stress can also affect their children. Over a third of the parents, that would be 36%, say that they have skipped or reduced the size of their own meals as a result of the corona crisis. And 12% of parents have skipped or reduced the size of meals they provide for their children. The pandemic has also greatly impacted California's families' ability to access health and wellness professionals. A third of our parents that were surveyed, so this came out of a survey that we conducted, 30% say that they have missed health appointments for their children due to the coronavirus. Further, nearly all parents, that would be 94, just about 94% of the folks, would like to access their child's doctor using telehealth, but at least a fifth, that would be 18% or so, are only a fifth, or currently less than a fifth, are currently able to do so. And somebody asked how we got that data, and if you see the global strategies information at the bottom, there is a link to further support that. So if we can go to our next slide. Thank you. So the data that was given was overall data. Now we're going to just give you a few facts around because we're again looking at it globally, and then we'll have more specific information in the webinar. And we know that some of our families have been hit harder than others, especially as it relates to distance learning. For example, during a recent seminar with migratory parents, some of the participants indicated the following. There was confusion about how to help students to improve language skills. Parents expressed that they didn't know whether to request assistance, and they also expressed concern about their child not having the opportunity to speak or practice English in distance learning, as their child only spoke if their teacher called upon them. And parents also expressed some concerns, expressed some critical ongoing needs that were including internet access, stronger bandwidth, particularly in rural areas, and then overall social isolation. So as we continue to look at the impact, and we're not sharing the data to paint a gloom and doom negative picture. However, we are sharing this information so that we can then begin to look at strategies around how to see our way out of this. So finally, we can see the direct impact on families as it relates to the care arrangements that they have been able to access during the pandemic. So before Corona, over a fifth, or 22% of families, relied on home or center-based childcare, and 38% had at least one parent staying home to care for their child. So now just 7% say their child care / daycare program is still open, and they're still attending at that level, and then 83% have at least one parent at home. In addition to the added burden of balancing working remotely with tending to their children or child, 63% of parents say they are now working from home. Parents are also disconnected with their usual support system. So among 2/3, that's 61% of parents, typically rely on friends and family to help with their childcare, which is unworkable for many parents while social distancing restrictions remain in place. Parents whose children participate in assistance programs like Early Head Start and Early Intervention and home visitation programs have also experienced significant disruptions, with 34% reporting not receiving services during the crisis. So now I'm going to transfer, or we're going to move into hearing about more specific impacts. And I'm going to hand the reins over of this part of the presentation to Steve, who will provide some information on what we know about the impact of COVID on our youngest learners. And then we'll hear from, Steve is our Director of Early Learning and Care, and we'll hear from our Director of Special Education, Heather Kauerz, and then we will also hear from our Interim Director of our Multilingual Support Division, Celine, and we're going to hear about the impacts of children with disabilities on all of those children and child groups. Steve?
Great. Thank you so much, Tina. So as we reflect on the data that Tina just shared on parental care arrangements, it's really no surprise that we've seen corresponding reductions in enrollment of children in subsidized childcare programs, as I'll touch on in the next slide. However, on this chart, we see that our TK-12 partners have also seen significant enrollment decreases in California's kindergarten programs. As you can see, even prior to this year, kindergarten enrollment has been declining recently. But as we look at our data between last year and this year, in 2021, we saw a significant drop in enrollment with about 61,000 fewer kindergartners enrolled in public school, or roughly a 12% reduction. Again, we know that in-person instruction also suffered, with many children being served either remotely or via hybrid instruction. And while we keep our hopes on a return to normal, it's not yet clear whether or how much public school, kindergarten, and first grade, as we look into next year, enrollment will rebound in the when schools go back to full-time in-person instruction. Perfect, thank you. So we also have some fairly stark data that indicate that our early learning and care workforce has also been hit hard. As we look at national data, which indicates that thousands of childcare providers closed their doors during the pandemic. At the end of last year, 1 in 4 facilities remained closed nationwide. In California, thinking about our more local context, we know that among our California state preschool program centers, nearly 43% closed for in-person education from April through December 2020. And we saw these closures reflected in CSPP enrollment data. So specifically, as we looked at the October 2019 CSPP enrollment of about 142,000, there was a decline in October 2020, about a 46% decline in enrollment compared to the previous year. So further, as we look at some data from the Center for American Progress, we look at some of the factors that have impacted programs in the workforce. We see that the cost of center-based care, childcare nationwide, jumped about 44%. Among the factors that drove costs up included new health and safety requirements and group size limits. And as we look at the ripple effect of things like this, increased costs make early education more expensive and more unaffordable for families, which further puts programs at risk of closure. And our families who can't afford the care and are not eligible for or don't have access to programs suffer. So this here is but one of the reasons as we look to the future and the bright future ahead. It's but one of the reasons we are so excited about the unprecedented investments in early education proposed for the coming years. And we look forward to working together with all of you to ensure they best support our children, our families, and providers. And so I think that covers it for me here. I'm going to turn it over to Heather Kauerz, who is our director of our Special Education Division, to talk to us a little bit about how children with disabilities have been particularly impacted by the pandemic.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Just really quickly, wanted to walk through some brief impacts of the pandemic on particularly our students with disabilities and our early learners. And really COVID presented a unique challenge in the sense of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was not designed for a pandemic. And so what the pandemic forced our community to do was essentially pivot to provide services that typically are delivered obviously in person, and moving them to a virtual environment, which proves especially challenging for students with more involved disabilities, particularly our students that have health medical needs as well. And so another impact is that oftentimes our early learners, and with all early learners, need time to practice and generalize skills across settings. And so COVID, really impacted young learners' ability to acquire a skill, also practice a skill, but it's really critical for our early learners, and particularly our early learners with disabilities, to generalize those skills across multiple contexts and multiple settings as well. And so, our community has done a tremendous job to address that, but realizing that, that really proves to be a large challenge as well. Another impact is really the delivery of supports and services via the IEP as well. And again, touching upon the fact that IDEA, again, was not designed for a pandemic. And so our, LEAs across the state really having to think creatively about how to essentially bring the IEP to life, and provide a free, appropriate public education via a virtual modality. And so, many parents obviously have expressed concerns, and LEAs have really, I think, done a tremendous job to address the needs of our students with disabilities. And so, really looking forward to discussing the ways in which COVID has presented opportunities and learning across the state in terms of best practices in terms of addressing the needs of students at this time. And at this point, I'll hand it over to, the impact on the preschool IEP enrollment in terms of subsidized programs. We can see here that the children who are essentially receiving a subsidy, who are on an IEP, at this point in time, throughout the 2020 has dipped slightly. And so that for us is something that we will obviously continue to watch. And then, the sort of counterpart slide to that is that the increase in preschoolers, with subsidy who have an IEP, and again, we're talking 10 or more, has also been impacted as well. Go to the next slide. And at this point in time, I will hand it over to our interim director of our Multilingual Support Division, Selena Torres.
Thank you, Heather. In the Multilingual Support Division, we oversee programs for English learners, immigrant students, and migratory students. Before I share out about the needs of English learner students during the pandemic, as background, let me share that in grades K through 3 in California, over 31% of students were classified as English learners in the 2021 school year. Initially, as the pandemic began in 2020, anecdotal information from English learner stakeholder groups indicated a high need in the following areas: access to internet and technology, provision of quality integrated and designated ELD instruction during distance learning, ability to provide opportunities for oral language development in remote learning settings, and administration of the English language proficiency assessments for California, otherwise known as the LPAC. Last month, the CDE conducted a survey of stakeholders to determine the 3 highest priority needs of English learners as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic in current year, and as students transition back to school in the next year. We received over 151 responses, including responses from staff from schools, districts, and county offices, as well as advocates and parents. The 3 highest priority needs were identified as follows: ELD, integrated and designated. Number 2, support for immigrant students, social emotional wraparound services. And 3, determining instructional levels for English learners, either using formative assessment, observations, and using local data. Our division, as I mentioned earlier, includes the Federal Migrant Education Program. And in grades K through 3, over 80% of migratory students are classified as English learners, and 60% of all migratory students K-12. Initially, as the pandemic began in 2020, anecdotal information from migrant education program staff indicated a high need in the following areas: access to the internet, especially in rural areas, need for increased bandwidth to utilize video, more than one hotspot per family, needs for computing devices, one device per student, not one per family, and adapting curriculum to online platforms, especially around needs for language support. Similarly, last month, the Multilingual Support Division also conducted a survey of migrant education program stakeholders to determine the highest priority needs of migratory students as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and moving forward into the next year. We received over 1,000 responses. 600 were from parents and the rest from school, district, and county staff. And in this survey, the 3 highest priority needs were as follows: mathematics instruction, English language development, and/or English language arts, as many parents were not clear how to request assistance to improve reading. Do they ask for help in ELD or in ELA? And finally, credit accrual. And those were the results of our survey. Now back to you, Tina.
Thank you so much, Stephen, Heather, and Selena. So now that we've looked at the impacts specifically, we really want to briefly just share some of the funding sources that are now available in order to address the impact of COVID that can be used to further the P3 alignment in really supporting our students. And so we have several federal fund sources. We have the ESSER-1, ESSER-2, and ESSER-3, and then you have the Gear 1 and Gear 2. And then we have the Expanded Care Assistance and Child Care Stabilization Funds. So that's at the federal level. And at the state level, we have SB 78 and AB 86. So as we are facing these unprecedented challenges that our divisions directors shared, we just wanted to share with you a little bit of the funding that's available out there. So we also have some broader system investments. We have strong signals and the federal level and clear indications at the state level of unprecedented investments in education, particularly in the early years. Oh, apparently I misspoke. It's not SB, it's SB 78, excuse me, I'm sorry. At the federal level, President Biden has also proposed billions to support universal preschool nationwide. And so we have quite a few areas of funding that will support the impact as we grow out what we need to do. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Deputy Superintendent, Sarah Neville Morgan, to talk about how all of this is related to CDE's Preschool to Third Grade Alignment Initiative. Sarah?
So much, Tina, appreciate it. So as you all know, CDE recently launched our P3 initiative. Our website just went live, I think last week, maybe the week before, and one of our first activities has been to convene this webinar series. This really is in an effort to support the community, the districts and school leaders, all of you who are seeking to build back from COVID, a better, stronger system that really supports our students and families. We're driven by the need to create more equitable opportunities to prevent the achievement gap from starting, to narrow it once it's started, to actively dismantle inequities and historic racism, to address things with a new focus, with new resources, and with philanthropic partners, to really pursue the programming that creates that more aligned early education and elementary system. Next slide. And we're taking this approach because decades of research, by now it's decades upon decades, clearly establishes the evidence base for working to ensure that children, when they have access to high quality preschool experiences, when they have effective early intervention supports, multilingual program models, and those aligned early elementary instruction, that we really can close that achievement gap. Developmental gaps between vulnerable young children and their peers begin early. We all know that. They can start as early as 8 months, 12 months, and they grow through preschool and become the achievement gap that we then see on our California school dashboard. So unless other learning opportunities such as quality preschool and come in, as if we're not able to support our multilingual learners, if we're not able to address children with disabilities, then we really need to think of ways to come together and do that throughout the system. All children throughout all of this can display the challenging behaviors during their development. Yet we know that when those behaviors are mixed with explicit or implicit racial and gender biases, that when our educators have inadequate professional learning support, they may then label children as behavior problems, especially boys of color, leading to higher rates of suspension and expulsion and fewer opportunities for these children to actually be in the learning environment. We also know that our children with disabilities, including those with the most significant disabilities and highest needs, can make significant developmental and learning progress in inclusive early childhood and school settings. And in that inclusion, our children without disabilities also benefit. With sufficient skill, knowledge, and experience, our preschool and early elementary teachers play a critical role in supporting each child's potential and identifying areas where additional support is needed. We also know from research on preschool fade out that the early elementary years are critical for sustaining the benefits of high quality preschool. Concepts that children learn during their preschool experience are frequently retaught when they enter kindergarten. If teachers are equipped with the skills and competencies necessary to provide inclusive, individualized instruction that's aligned with preschool, our vulnerable young children would undoubtedly fare better. And that is a huge reason why we're doing this. The next slide will show some of the building on the early learning plans that are already out there. So it's not that we're doing this in isolation, but truly building on work and expertise. So from transforming the workforce from children birth through age 8 that came out in 2015 from the Institutes of Medicine, to the California's work on the transforming the workforce and the implementation plan that was created. In 2019, we had a preschool development grant with a strategic plan that really pulled up work from the Assembly Blue Ribbon Commission. And then in 2021, we were able to launch in California a master plan for early learning and care that really extended this work, and pieces of which can now be seen in the budget proposals that are going through the Capitol in our usual California process right now, including universal preschool expansion and how we create formal linkages between early childhood and the preschool and the K-12 system. So moving on to CDE's P-3 priorities. If you joined our webinar in December, you actually saw some of these. So I'm going to really quickly move us through them. But first, most explicitly, we're focused on ensuring access to an effective preschool experience for all of our young children. So hence that move in the budget towards a universal system to support preschool. Next, we want to ensure best practices for supporting multilingualism and multiliteracy, including that early identification of our dual language learners and supports around home language and English. We want to focus on identifying young children with disabilities early to ensure that they get the supports that they need and strengthen transitions for children into preschool and K-3 settings to support continuity of services. We also want to dial in on strategies to sustain those early gains by supporting developmentally informed, rigorous, and joyful environments with aligned curriculum, assessment, and best practices across the P-3 years. In order to do this, we know that we need a better teacher pipeline and more professional learning that's aligned. We've also seen through the events of recent years that it's paramount for the education leaders to acknowledge and actively dismantle inequities by addressing implicit and explicit bias, ensuring integration and support for all children, and eliminating suspension and expulsion seclusion and restraint, and other exclusionary discipline practices. We know all of these priorities require investing in the long-term development of strong leaders with administrators, school board members, and others throughout our educational system. And finally, in order to ensure continued investments and identify those disparities, we really believe in data and collecting, integrating, and use of data through data literacy so that we can learn and understand more. So now I am so excited to actually move us into the heart of today's presentation and introduce to all of you the National P-3 Center and Kristie Kauerz, who is helping us with this daunting work in California. I've personally wanted to work with Kristie for years, and I'm so excited that we were finally able to have our expertise here with us as we launch this work. So a quick shout out and thanks to the Silver Giving Foundation for making Kristie and her attention and focus on California possible. So Kristie, off to you.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And thanks to the rest of your team for having me. What I'd like to do is introduce a little bit about the National P-3 Center and describe how we are engaging with California to be thinking about supporting the very efforts that Sarah has just described. Next slide, please. The National P-3 Center's entire mission is to bridge these two systems, understanding that early care and education and the pre-K-12 systems often work in isolation from one another. And so we take a systemic lens on our work. Next slide, please. In which we're thinking about this full continuum, again, that has already been described, where we're looking at the age ranges, birth to 3, pre-K, although here in California, we also should be adding a TK arrow as well, and then thinking about kindergarten through 3rd grade. And the intention of this work is to absolutely think about increasing the quality and efficacy of the programs within each age or grade level. But the real magic sauce in P3 is aligning across the age or grade levels. Now, as I just noted, next slide, please, there's a birth to 5 system, which is going to include not just the California Department of Education, and also a pre-K through 12th grade system. Next slide, please, or click. Thank you. And working to align these is one of the real challenges in the P3 space. Our first work here in California is to be thinking about the green rectangle, where we're really considering the programs and funding streams that are managed inside California Department of Education and that are supported by CDE through LEAs throughout the state, and considering ways to create higher quality programs within each grade level, and then again, aligning across. FDK stands for full day kindergarten. We won't spend a lot of time talking about full day K, but I think research and practice tells us that full day K is far more effective for both children and families than half day K. That's why it's part of the formula. Next slide. Another way to look at this age continuum is developmentally, or looking at brain development. This is one of my favorite slides. Along the x-axis there, we have children's age, birth through age 70. The dark red line that starts high on the left and descends as we age is normal brain malleability, or the ability to create new neural pathways and to learn new behaviors, skills, and knowledge. The pale red line that starts low on the birth side and increases over time is the physiological effort required to enhance our brain development. So this is a way of showing that when we are young, our brain development is more malleable and more rapid, which means that is the time that we can influence the most, because we have to invest the least amount of effort to create those new neural pathways. Whereas the older we get, we can absolutely always still learn new things, create new neural pathways, but the effort required to do so is simply harder. What I always like to say to a group full of adults is to take a moment and find yourself on there and just let it sort of sink in that the older we get, the harder it is to learn new things. Anyone who's learned to try to speak a foreign language after the age of 30 will recognize this deeply. Next slide. And so the P3 continuum maximizes this end of our brain development continuum, where we have the most opportunity at the least physiological effort. And so the punchline here is that P3 is not just a one-year intervention. It's not just about high quality pre-K or high quality TK, nor is it about a really good IEP experience for children with disabilities. It's thinking about the full continuum of time and dosage after dosage of high quality learning opportunities and supports provided to children and families. Next slide. Now, this is an important stance of my center, is that clearly we all want to see better outcomes for young children. However, next slide. What we know is that we only get to better child and student outcomes if we are able to change the skills, behaviors, and knowledge of the adults that surround children. And so this could be families, but in this P3 system that we're thinking about right now, we're focused on, if we read this theory of change from right to left, if we want better child and student outcomes, we have to shift teachers' capabilities. We have to shift the kinds of learning environments being provided, the kinds of instructional supports, differentiated supports being provided by teachers. However, we also know that we can spend a lot of time and money investing in PD for teachers. And if we put those teachers back into schools or programs in which their administrators, their bosses, don't also understand child development and high quality pedagogy for young learners, then that teacher PD often does not get implemented very well. And so what we focus on in the National P3 Center's work is figuring out ways to shift administrator capabilities, school district capacity and organization, and then state policy and supports. You can click, please. And so this will be the target of our work in California, is thinking about these system level or organizational strategies that have clear influence and impact on teachers, who then have direct impact and influence on children's and families' experiences, and then therefore also outcomes. Next slide. Part of the equation of this P3 work is focusing on ensuring that children are ready for school. This has clearly been the rally cry for high quality pre-K, high quality TK, all of the early intervention services that children experience prior to kindergarten, is ensuring that children are better prepared to have smooth transitions into kindergarten and then to feel well adjusted and be successful in school. However, next slide, please. In this P3 work, we also want to make sure that schools are ready for children, that it's not just putting the burden of readiness on children's abilities to pass the right tests or check the right check boxes, but that schools themselves are creating the environments, the classrooms, and the learning experiences that are going to support children no matter what kinds of background and experiences they bring into the school door. Next slide, please. A quick note is that my center has published this framework for planning, implementing, and evaluating P3 approaches that provides a template or a framework of the different things that need to be aligned. This is a freely available resource on our website. We'll circle back to how you can get it later but it's also going to be helping to guide some of our thinking and work in California. Next slide. Another resource that the National P-3 Center has helped to develop that's influential in this organizational change space is that we collaborated with NAESP, the National Association for Elementary School Principals, to update a guide that is really geared towards elementary principals, providing them strategies to increase their own knowledge and their own dispositions and strategies to support not just pre-K, but also those early grades of kindergarten through third grade. Next slide. And then finally, we also have a framework that is explicitly geared towards school districts and really trying to understand what central office organization and culture needs to look like. So for example, we know that many LEAs, whether it be county offices or school districts themselves, might have a single staff person devoted to early learning or pre-K. While we believe that is a necessary first step to bringing prioritization to this P3 continuum, we think it's an insufficient step because we also want to be thinking about what are the connections to the teaching and learning division, to the special education division, to the assessment division, and all of those other areas in school districts and organizations need to have some expertise in early learning and the early grades. So these variables are some of the things that we will be working on in collaboration with CDE and others across the state, is thinking about not only inside CDE, but also in local education agencies, who are the divisions and organizations, staff roles that need to be engaged in this P3 work. Next slide, please. So I now want to share just a couple of key points about thinking in this arena of P3 as has been laid out by my CDE friends at the beginning of this webinar. And one thing that I want to start with is that the pandemic has certainly caused gravely concerning trends for our young children and their families, but these existed before. P3 has long been a strategy and it's long been an important continuum to think about. So the pandemic really just exacerbated existing inequities. For example, next slide, please. And Bree, for these next ones, you can just keep clicking and I will talk as you go slowly. Many of the research says that we have a lost generation. And lots of research is showing some of the gaps. Some of the California specific data were already shared. I cringe at statements like this because I don't believe there is a lost generation. And I think meaningful strategic P3 approaches will help to meet children where they are and bring them up to speed if we invest the long-term effort in. So just to point out how the pandemic has only exacerbated existing inequities. These are California NAEP data, the National Assessment of Education Progress. These are grade 4 reading scores. And we look back over 20 years, starting in 1998 and looking at up until 2019, so pre-pandemic. And I just want you to see that achievement gaps between subpopulations of children existed 20 years ago, and they still existed before the pandemic. You can click here. And again. And in fact, that achievement gap has even grown. This one in particular is showing the, those black brackets are showing the black-white achievement gap at grade 4. Next slide. We can also look at similar data for children who were eligible for the National School Lunch Program. So this is a proxy for family income. And again, you can see 20 years ago, there was a gap between those that are eligible and those that are not eligible. 20 years ago, it was a 36-point gap. This one has closed a little bit, but I would challenge anyone to pat themselves on the back that this is a wild success in closing the income gap. Next slide. Because California is focused on special populations, I wanted to make sure that we address each of these. So here's similar data for children by disability status. And I should note that 20 years ago, the reporting requirements were different, so we can only look back 10 years right now. But 10 years ago, there was, or 12 years ago now, a 43-point gap. 2019, oops, we went a little fast. Yep, 48-point gap. So that one's increased. Now you can keep going. Thanks, Bree. And then by English language learner status, again, 20 years ago, reporting requirements were not met, but we can see that the gap has persisted over time. Bree, you can keep clicking. I should note, I'm not sure why the legend isn't showing up correctly, but those yellow lines would just be the opposite. So this one, the yellow line is those who are not English language learner status. So all to say, the pandemic has exacerbated challenges that were there before. And the reality of the pandemic has been this fits and starts of children's learning settings. Sometimes online, sometimes with an adult present, whether it be a family member or a parent, sometimes in front of a teacher, sometimes not at all, just given family circumstances. And so P3 approaches have become even more important now to begin to restabilize the learning environments for young children in early learning and the early grades. Key point number 2, one of the things that concerns me a bit about pandemic responses right now is a fervor to have silver bullet solutions, that if we just do this one thing, then we're going to turn things around, kids will be fine. And so words like accelerated learning or make me a little bit nervous, because I think this P3 space requires a long-term strategy and staying the course. Because what we do know from places that have done P3 in the past is that there are long-term effects. I want to quickly point out 2 success stories because their outcomes are notable. Next slide. This is a complicated slide. I'm not going to take time to explain, but this is sort of the P3 visual from Montgomery County Public Schools in the state of Maryland. Montgomery County is one of the largest school districts in the country, also one of the most diverse. They have some of the lowest income zip codes as well as some of the highest income zip codes. 20 years ago, they had some of the starkest achievement gaps as well. And so they implemented a P3 approach. Could you go back just real quickly? They implemented a P3 approach that included several things. Clearly a focus not just on pre-K, but also on grades K1, 2, and 3. They included summer learning opportunities. They included after-school learning opportunities. They aligned their curriculum and assessment. They provided rich professional development to teachers. In fact, they also provided intensive professional development to every staff member in the district, not just teachers, but lunchroom ladies, school bus drivers, front office secretaries, because they knew that those were often staff that saw families and children even more. Now you can go to the next slide. So they started this P3 approach in 2003, and you can see that over the course of 6 years, and these are 3rd grade reading assessment scores on the Maryland State Assessment, you can see that over the course of time, those achievement gaps began to close. And this is because I'm going back to my point of P3 takes time. It takes time to get people to buy into it. It takes time to get teachers and administrators fully comfortable in changing the way they do things. It takes time to build the trust. It takes time to learn new curriculum and assessments. And so as the system and the organization got smarter and stronger, those achievement gaps began to close. Next slide. One of the notable outcomes is in Montgomery County public schools is that those children that started kindergarten in 2003, by the time they graduated high school, I'm going to say this slowly because it's in small print. By the time those kids graduated high school, African-American boys had higher high school graduation rates, higher AP scores and AP participation, and higher college going rates than the national average for all white children. African-American males outperformed the national average for all white students. And so the payoff here is real if a system takes it seriously and really is devoted to, again, not just a one-year intervention, but year after year of aligned high quality experiences. Next slide, please. One example is good. I think two is always better. This is another set of data from Chicago Public Schools, clearly another very large district, a very diverse district. They offer programs called CPC, Child Parent Centers. That's what the CPC stands for here. And these are showing outcomes data for students, comparing children who attended or had a pre-K through third grade experience, meaning high quality pre-K, kindergarten, family centers in the elementary schools, smaller class sizes in K-1-2, teachers who had higher professional learning levels. And you can see in third grade, those students that had the pre-K through third grade experience outperformed their peers who did not have a similar experience. The bar chart on the right compares those same students at seventh grade, and that still holds. Next slide, please. And then here's, if there are any business officers or fiscal people on the call, this is the money payoff, is that those children that had a strong pre-K through third grade experience had lower grade retention by age 15 and lower rates of special education placement by age 18. And so again, the payoffs for this are important. Next slide. So the punchline here is that all of us today in the pandemic and with all of the various funding streams need to be considering smart short-term strategies, but picking those strategies that align with this longer-term vision of really changing the whole trajectory of learning experiences provided to children. Next slide. So I want to spend my last few minutes talking more specifically about what some of those short-term strategies might look like. I think the pandemic responses have to go back to some of the basics, and I'm also trying to follow the chat, and it sounds like some of this is coming up. One of the things that we know about young children's learning and development is that it's not all about cognitive or academic skills. We know that young children are also developing critical social and emotional, self-regulatory and executive function skills. And these can be taught explicitly, and these can be supported explicitly. And we know that by providing these kinds of experiences to young children, it helps them to stay engaged and attend to some of the cognitive or academic outcomes that many policymakers tend to prioritize. So thinking about strategies that focus on social and emotional and whole child development. Next slide. We also know that children's learning and development are deeply and profoundly influenced by the relationships they have, both with adults and with peers. And so considering strategies that emphasize teacher skills, teachers' abilities to deal with challenging behaviors, teachers' abilities to differentiate instruction, teacher abilities to support our English language learners, children with special needs, and then also considering family engagement strategies, because young children spend so much of their time with families as well. So thinking about relationship-based strategies, third. And this is really the family punchline, is that some families have had some control throughout the pandemic. Many have not, because of the numbers of jobs they've had to work, the kinds of living situations and housing circumstances they're in. And so really thinking about how to not just support children, but their families is also critical. Next slide. Thinking across the full continuum. You can keep going, thank you. So the strategies need to not just be in preschool, although I want to start with preschool because preschool investments are clearly a top priority in the state of California with some of the new budget announcements that have been made in particular. This is a pie chart from the National Institute of Early Education Research that shows that more than half of 4-year-olds in California are still not enrolled in any kind of formal program. That 37% of the pie chart does include both CSPP and TK. So that does include both of those preschool programs, and then you can also see Head Start and special ed needed there. Next slide, please. As Sarah mentioned earlier, then we also need to be thinking about kindergarten. One of the things that has now been studied by multiple researchers in multiple states is this notion of content redundancy. And the height of these bar graphs are showing the amount or the percentage of content redundancy between pre-K and K across domains of learning. And you can see it to the far left, 37% of content overall was redundant between pre-K and K in this one particular study. That might benefit some children, but it's not going to benefit all children. And so really helping kindergarten teachers and first grade teachers in particular to think about the different kinds of preschool experiences children are bringing into K and 1 grades is going to be important. This same data set that I just shared has also done a study of teachers. And what it has shown is that in those high stakes grade levels, so those where there are state assessments administered that have stakes attached, is where the highest performing teachers are assigned. Whereas in the non-tested grade levels or the lower stakes grade levels, K1, 2 is where lower performing teachers tend to be assigned. I want to quickly say there are obviously volumes of very excellent kindergarten, first and second grade teachers. This is a research snapshot. We don't know necessarily why this is so, but we do know that many principals and administrators feel pressure to assign their most effective teachers to those tested grade levels and put their less effective teachers in the primary grades, signaling once again that if we could shift administrators' understanding of what works and what doesn't work, that we might begin to see changes in those early grades. Next slide. Okay, we're going to click through these fairly quickly because there is some redundancy and we want to make sure we leave some time to answer your questions. What I've pulled together are some suggestions of strategic use of funds. First, I want you to be paying attention to the black boxes on the left. Most of the federal relief funds allow any activity that's already authorized by ESEA. So we don't necessarily need to be looking for new shiny pennies. We need to be doubling down on some of the investments and strategies, again, that we've known matter for a long time. Whether it be thinking differently about the kinds of instructional programs, although going to my point of remembering to go back to the basics, really leaning into social, emotional, and mental health in these programs, thinking about extended day and summer programs, professional learning for teachers or administrators, purchasing assistive technology and adaptive equipment for students with special needs. Next slide. A second option for using some of these existing funding streams is to better coordinate with relevant agencies. And this is where the school systems and our early childhood programs can be finding ways to partner together, whether it be in thinking about recruitment and enrollment strategies for pre-K and TK, thinking about transition strategies, whether they be jumpstart-like programs where there's kind of a week-long boot camp before kindergarten starts, or other transition activities, but finding ways for those early care and education programs and K-12 system to work together to coordinate responses. Next slide. Third option is thinking about our administrators and school leaders and providing them with resources, training, and knowledge around child development, social emotional development, trauma-informed practices, family engagement. Any of the priorities that I've articulated are things that most principals and school leaders do not usually get in their pre-service or in-service professional learning. Next slide. Other options would be to address the unique needs of subpopulations of children. And for example, with transition activities, there's great research that shows clearly that some children need better kinds of transition activities than others. Children in single child families, they didn't get to learn from an older sibling. They're figuring it out on their own. Children that live in rural areas. So targeting some of these strategies that I've already mentioned to unique subpopulations of children are allowable uses of these funds. Next slide. That seems to be the same one. Next slide. Providing mental health services and supports. This would be considering the needs and professional learning opportunities needed by families, teachers, staff, administrators. Again, these are going back to the basics of what do we know matters most to support young children's learning and development. Next slide. Activities related to summer learning and after school programming. I want to spend 1 minute on the first bullet is that one of the things, and this came up, and I think it was Stephen's slide at the beginning of the webinar, is we saw dramatic decreases of enrollment in kindergarten and TK and pre-K. Many of those families may just be moving their children directly into kindergarten or first grade. And so being particularly intentional about identifying and providing additional supports to those children that might have missed some of these key years of learning would be key. Next slide. And then addressing disruptions to learning. I also want to spend 1 minute on this first bullet because it emphasizes kindergarten and first grade teachers. Clearly, we also care about professional development for pre-K and TK teachers. But I noted earlier that it's the kindergarten and first grade teachers who are likely to see the biggest spread of developmental abilities inside their classrooms this fall. They will be having kids who had a high quality pre-K and TK and are advanced. And they will also be having children who this might be their very first formal learning setting. And kindergarten and first grade teachers will need to be bolstered in their strategies about understanding those full developmental trajectories that they're seeing and being able to provide differentiated instruction to every child in their classroom. We also know that the funds can help to provide coaches and or teacher aides to support and promote individualized supports inside classrooms. You will be hearing from us. As Sarah noted, my center is going to be engaging with California for the remainder of this year. We do send out periodic updates through a listserv. If you're interested in subscribing, you can do so here. And I think now, Tina, is it back to you?
Kristie. It's back to Sarah and I as we share this space, and really want to take a look at how we're highlighting the focus on inclusion, our multilingual learners, and our children with special needs while addressing implicit and explicit bias. So as you begin to think about some of the learning that has taken place today, let's just recap really quickly around some of the desired needs and spaces, right? So we need internet and stronger broadband services in rural areas, especially the impacts on our tribal and migrant families. We need to assess effective preschool centers and home-based bilingual programs and models, and then a transition back to school, including social activities and programs to ease back into school, especially for children who have been isolated and have been in isolated communities, right? So we also need to take the opportunity for oral language development and English language development in engaging fun settings and some summer learning activities, and really being prepared to embrace and accept those children as we begin accepting them back into our in-person learning. And then also, we need to look at professional learning opportunities for our teachers and leaders with a focus on how to promote and implement integrated and designed English language development, how to assess and determine instructional levels for English learners, and how we can best support students dealing with trauma arising out of their daily lives and the impacts of COVID. So dealing with students, how to deal with students with trauma and social and emotional learning. So, and then we also want to take a look at creating assets-oriented pathways to biliteracy and multiliteracy starting early. So these are some of the things that we'd like to highlight and bring back around from this presentation. And for children with disabilities, we want for early start, we want to support with statewide referrals and child find, along with improved family engagement and support activities for families, collaboration at the state and local for smooth transitions, right, from early start to preschool environments. And that is so we are working in an SB 75 transition work group that is providing recommendations that need to be funded. We also want us to think about providing continuity and pathways for families and their infants in need of a uniform data system. For preschool, so that was early start. For preschool, we want to build on existing strengths and priorities and activities that programs implemented. The activities that programs have already implemented. We want continuous and ongoing joint professional development for special education and general education staff. So not just teachers, right, but the full continuum of staff. And we need to support with social emotional development. And this is in the preschool level. These are the things that we're looking at. Collaboration, again, with state and local for smooth transitions with grade levels P-3, so preschool to third grade, building a hub of statewide resources to support this effort. And again, to support with family engagement, invest in early literacy programs, specifically early biliteracy, and to build a strong workforce. So we initiate processes to embed the goals into IEPs for second and third graders that sets them towards a pathway for employment, university, trade schools, etc. So those are some of the things that we would like to uplift and highlight as we look at this P3 work. So you've had an opportunity to present. The chat has been having a great time, lots of movement and conversation. And so at this point, it would be awesome. And I told you in the beginning that we were going to come back and ask you about your wows and wonders. And so what have you had? What have you not thought about before this that you are thinking about now? And if you can drop this, I believe we're asking you to drop it in the chat. Yeah, hold on, I'm sorry. And then what did this presentation confirm for you that you're already working on? We'd love to hear that. And what did this spark in you that might add to your local, that you might already add to your local plans? The idea, you know, is that you have this funding coming, you have local plans coming, and can you see how you would fit more into kind of this P3 alignment strategy in effort to create some of those wonderful outcomes for students through those alignment strategies that we had a chance to take a look at, especially that we heard from our national expert? And then what do you want to learn more about in the future? So we know that there have been a lot of Q&A. There's some questions sitting in Q&A, and our desire is to address those questions. And they have been, I believe my team has been working to answer those questions as they have been going on. And I'm going to see if I can take a look at some of your wows and wonders and lift those up briefly. I'm trying to take a look at that. So let me see if we can access that or how my team wants to handle this. I don't necessarily want to just continue throughout the questions that are sitting out there. But let's see if we can grab some of the wows and wonders here. And that means I'm going to wade through. So as I look at wows and wonders, it's exciting to see. Let me just share a few. I scrolled back too far, so hold on. As I'm looking at the live chat, and I believe that Kristie has hopped back on to answer some questions. And if I can get.
Great, thanks, Tina. So I did want to chime in. I've been trying to catch up on the chat, and I wanted to address a couple of things about this push down, trickle down, push up. Absolutely. What we're thinking about is the push up of child-friendly practices into those early grades. We know that the early childhood field has largely known this, but the early childhood field doesn't always trickle into the school system. And so it is very much a push up of developmentally informed practices into elementary schools. Not at all a push down of academic expectations or of high stakes assessments. It's really about making the whole P3 continuum more child friendly and more developmentally supportive. Another one that I wanted to lean into is this notion of developmentally appropriate practice in education. If we had all day, I have an entire set of slides that talks about the challenges of communicating between ECE and K-12. Developmentally appropriate practice is a word that the early childhood field embraces and has largely guided the field. It's not a term that is as widely known in K-12, and when it is known, it's largely misunderstood to be something that's, I think many K-12 people might see play-based DAP practices as, chaos and uncontrolled, uncontrolled classrooms. And so what I always say when I'm working with school districts is we just have to figure out how to speak the right language that the other side is going to hear. And so this is in the work that we do, we lean into understanding child development and brain development and thinking about relationships and social emotional concepts and terms that are very prevalent in the K-12 world, but that the early childhood field is also doing. So it's a little bit of code switching, if you will, of getting our ideas across, but communicating them in ways that they will be heard and understood.
Thank you, Kristie. I appreciate you coming on to address some of those questions. As we look through the wows and wonderings in the chat, somebody said that P3 is their wow. And really taking a look at the cross communication is necessary, and the impact of the outcomes from the data that we shared is a wow, which is exciting. And I think really, and I'm really just scrolling through the chats pretty quickly. There have been some wonders. Oh, another wow that we have is we have found that we have implemented great practices in preschool and TK, and the K3 is asking us to scale up their grades. And so I think really seeing the alignment and the impact has been a wow. Let's see here. ADA for preschool is a wow and maybe a wonder. Another wow, the opportunity to create a cohesive system to benefit all students has me very excited about the future. We need our P3 educational warriors and experts to take the lead. Absolutely. Another wow. Other folks were excited to see that CDE has entered this space and that we are taking the lead, which is a wow and a wonder in my opinion. And then a wonder, does P3 have specific training / universal training for districts? Is the process on the district to begin? How can we start? It's very exciting and overwhelming. So we are definitely aware, and as we are entering in this space at CDE, and in all honesty and frankness, we are building our capacity as well. And so working with you, the field on how to do this together. There are folks out there who have been doing this work, and getting everybody connected is a desired goal of our P3 alignment here at CDE. And so I hope that addresses that to some degree. Is a P3 teaching credential coming? Can I just smile as the answer for that? I'll just leave that. That's good. That's a wondering.
Hey, Tina, can I jump in? Can I jump in real quickly?
Absolutely, please.
I do want to quickly answer the question about, are there trainings? I can't remember the exact phrasing, but trainings for P3. You would have to move quickly, but the National P3 Center is offering a fully online P3 leadership certificate program. Applications are due June 11th. But it is a 10-month, so it's pretty intensive. This is not a one and done workshop, but it is an intensive leadership program, primarily designed for administrators. So principals, assistant principals, program directors, program managers on both the ECE and pre-K through 12th side. We'll put my center's website address back in the chat. You can find a link to learn more about it there. So ours is the only national online version, but there are a number of places. In fact, there are some awesome school districts in California that have done this. Deanna Mathis, I saw your name on the chat. I want to shout out to Fresno and others that have been working for years to be providing really intentional PD to administrators and others. So yes, there are opportunities, and part of what we can do is help you get connected to those.
Thank you, Kristie, for sharing those training opportunities. That's fantastic. As we look towards moving to the end of this webinar, please know that we will take all of your questions, your wows, and your wonderings, and we will begin to address those in preparation actually for future webinars as well, as we begin this work. So it is exciting. We are glad you were here. One other wondering or wow that I saw in the chat that really impacted me. I saw it a couple of times. Some of you have written that these discussions began in the 70s, right? Years ago. So it isn't anything that we are necessarily creating that is new. However, it is something that is exciting to uplift now in light of what we have seen with the impact of COVID, and then just in general before the pandemic. And so what a great way to bring our children forward with an alignment that doesn't have them repeating and doing a lot of things that they've already done. So with that said, in closing, opportunities for questions and comments can be sent to the P3 alignment@cbe.ca.gov email. There is 1 or 2 people manning that email, so just be mindful that we may or may not be able to get back to you as soon as possible. We will get back to you as soon as possible. So, and then also please check out our website. We have launched a website, super excited to share that information with you. And that can be found at the link that you are seeing in front of you. But for those of you who are auditory learners, http www.cde.ca.gov. If you click on that, it'll take, and then there's a P3 link there. And then watch your inbox for more invites, information, and installments of our P3 webinar series. So Sarah, I'm going to hand it to you as we close this out.
Thank you so much, Tina. And thank you to everybody else who participated today, for all of you who joined. Kristie, thank you, thank you, thank you. We're so excited to get to have you on this journey with us as we go through it and pull in more and more locals and other partners so that we really do this right and well and address what we need to from COVID in a systemic long-term way. So as you said, it's ongoing and not that one silver bullet, but something that we put in place that actually helps our children and students over time. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your evening, and we will see you again. Bye.